is it that Jujutsu Kaisen has seen such a massive explosion in popularity? And how is it that an anime can catapult a series past 25 million total sales? A popular shonen series getting an anime is something we see every year. And most of the time they do go down well. And if we look at the titles that have been given an anime in the past few years, each of them have had success in their own regard, with some of them going on to over-deliver on any sort of expectation the fans of the series could have hoped for. But the trend that we do see is that if a manga gets an amazing adaptation, that means everything that surrounds that series is about to see a massive rise in popularity, that it then is going to be touted as the new king of shonen. So if Jujutsu Kaisen has become a massive series, then it must be doing something groundbreaking, huh? Well, that's the thing. The best way to describe JJK is to take all the biggest shonen you can think of, fuck them into a blender, sprinkle in some insane animation and some yaoi bait, and bam! No. Actually, instead, take a lovable main character like Hinata from Haikyuu, hit him with an undercut so he looks some bit edgy, add in Parasite and Tokyo Ghoul's half-human, half-monster narrative, then drop him into Team 7, but this time Kakashi is upside down, a power system like Nen but not actually Nen, some pacing from Attack on Titan, have Mappa make you forget there's any other anime even on this season, some MW2 aimbot cause none of these episodes miss what is one of the strongest female lineups in shonen history, as well as an overarching objective that we kind of forget about, as well as material for the yaoi fans, and then boom, you actually have it. But if it's just taking part from all these other series, then it doesn't deserve to be big because it's not original. This is why it has exploded, whereas a series like Demon Slayer is seen as being a good and basic shonen and does everything a good shonen needs to do. JJK takes everything we all love from other massive series, bring it all together, make it work, and actually execute on them well. These absolutely irredeemable villains that are written as just pure evil, while also being able to body 99% of their opponents, builds up a level of urgency and threat in that world. Multiple character tragedies because bullying was so early 2000s. A series of coordinated fights that isn't officially a tournament arc but kind of sort of is a tournament arc, so basically while everyone and their dead horse says a shonen that does good shonen good is kind of right, the series actually does so much more to introduce other elements that it doesn't stagnate from just being the same as the rest but identifies itself as its own thing while still being that same thing.
Do you understand?
In most series we see this thing happen where we get a conveyor belt of increasingly stronger opponents, continuously, and I mean continuously, scaling up that threat level enough to keep everyone erect and tuning in the next week. I mean, yeah, we all know it's a cheap trick, but it's got us. As a result, we never really get to see what real power is in the series. We only ever see more powerful things to compare the power we know to. This is especially prevalent when one stretchy boy can bonk every opponent he faces. Jujutsu Kaisen from the jump does not just establish what absolute power is, but most importantly, shows what happens when the most powerful from either side go against each other. And this is important because without a clear display of power levels within a series, it's going to lead to fans rioting over whether Gorilla Panda can beat Gorilla Man. We are also provided with somewhat clear and definitive rankings that represent how strong a sorcerer is, although these rankings are only used for registered users, which doesn't allow us to learn about any of the unregistered ones. And while power scaling does help figure things out, it doesn't always guarantee that that character will be able to survive any longer than the other. Yet in fights we see between characters of a similar level, they then result in these amazing yet brutal scenes that the anime and manga constantly deliver upon.
Fight!
It's hype! Just absolute hype! Every fight in this series, be it from Gojo vs Jogo or Kung Fu Panda 4 vs Terminator Genesis 2 to I'll Be Back Director's Cut, is laid out and choreographed in this way where everything flows seamlessly from one movement to the next. This series does away with the old shonen, hey, I'm going to beat you up and make you think about what you've done, and replacing it with the stance that a lot of newer age shonen are starting to take, where protagonists actually try to go in for the kill but look slick as fuck while doing so. Every hit that lands carries a weight behind it that perfectly sets up and flows into the next movement. Then add in the flashes of cursed energy or any technique used whatsoever, and the entire fight starts to slowly morph into a piece of modern art, taking every single manga planet and expanding on it massively while still retaining the most memeable of them. Each fight forces characters to constantly try something new and not rely on spamming the same attack over and over, which I don't know, just makes them all stand out from each other, so that when you look back on the series you can remember them that much better, unlike some shit that you just tried to forget. After the halfway point in the season, Mappa decided to make every fight in this series feel like a season finale. Just watching the episode that Todo and Yuji team up against Hanami, the action sequencing, the pace and the flow of the scenes feel like something that should be topping off the halfway point or the end of the series. But Mappa said fuck that and somehow continued to knock it out of the park as they had done all along and constantly step up their game. Mahito getting straight jumped brings to life the level of hand-to-hand combat ability of both Yuji and Nanami, showing how much Yuji has grown while also giving us a feel of how powerful and capable one of the series' main antagonists can be. Gojo vs Jogo then shows us the levels of destruction that those with massive power are capable of, as well as teaching us about the power of domain expansion. Domain expansion being the near peak of a sorcerer's ability, where they create a domain unique to them, in which they are more accurate, more powerful, and have an advantage in nearly every way, with each of the domains that we see early on tying back in some sense to their creator. Sukuna has this dark and intimidating malevolent shrine, Jogo has a volcano, Mahito has some form of a multiplayer tomb war, and Gojo's insanely broken infinite void domain basically acting like a DMT trip. While every fight in this series is vastly different from the last one to the next one, they all carry different risks. Some are more playful than the others, yet there are still a vast amount of high threat situations that pop up. In these fights, danger is present in every scenario. There's no option for a warm-up fight to show character progress, as most of the time they are instantly thrown in at the deep end. These characters remember all of the fights that they were in, because they do not have any way of recovering from their wounds, much to the opposite of the trend that we usually see in Shonen Jump, where there's usually a skill on hand to wipe away any of these injuries. Yet here it's a brutal reminder that they were, of the mistakes that they have made and how fragile they can be. Yuji as a protagonist does everything a shonen main character needs to do, but is also written in such a way that he is capable of being distinct from the others, being able to deliver these scenes that rip your heart out, and actually rip your fucking heart out, maintaining this happy-go-lucky comedic air as well as rushing headfirst into danger cause anybody can catch these hands. Being the most dangerous curse as well as being an amateur is like playing a game of chicken with a stick of TNT. And while we have seen this dynamic in the past, it hasn't really been done to this extent. This sort of I need to be careful in case the other guy shows up and destroys everything in a 20-mile radius sort of threat. A threat, as we've seen, can't be negotiated with. This spin on the dynamic allows for a tone to be set when Sukuna does decide to appear. Sukuna exists as his own character with his own overarching objective that affects other characters in the story. So when he does appear, he tries to push his own narrative and break down Yuji in the process. But people are quick to stand up and say that this is generic and hasn't done anything different. And while what the series does isn't a major innovation, a lot of people are just not fully aware of the intricacies of this dynamic and haven't seen the full extent of its damaging effects. Or maybe they're just hopping on the bandwagon of bashing the newest series. The only reason that Sukuna remains with Yuji is because he's waiting for a better option to show up. And we've already seen how Sukuna will deal with him when that time comes. Sukuna doesn't just reside within Yuji, but actively decides when he wants to take control of him. And bar some early signs has often dictated everything he does without any restraint. Sukuna's displays of raw evil allow us to understand how the series is going to handle main villains as we move forward. In this series, major villains don't get bodied by the high school kids. Well, except that one part, but that's like when you multiply a minus by a minus and get a plus. Major villains, at least for what most people see at the start, are capable of one-shotting most core characters, barred they don't get a clean shot in. Even if it looks like there is one, that buddy-buddy villain society that we do see is more of a facade that exists for each of them to try and advance their own goals. Because from everything we get to learn from Jogo and Mahito is that they want to do things their own way, regardless of how they're trying to achieve the same thing, even if it does mean getting straight clapped by your target. Villains are simply brought together because they're a bunch of evil guys that want to do evil things and bring back the times when they could do the evil things easier? Wait a minute. Oh, so they live in the past, like Bleach fans. What they do represent though is a problem. What their presence means is that if you're a bad matchup or can't win that fight, then that's your bad luck. Easily put, any character is only a wrong turn or a chance encounter for being completely wiped out. And this just feels different, because while we're used to seeing shonen villains gain a massive advantage, say no thanks, turn on the wait timer and wait until the advantage evaporates, here they take their chances and kill while they can. And while the series still does the whole we're not done with this villain yet scenario, it's done in this way that makes each encounter feel like the stakes have been raised massively time and time again. The simple act of not pulling punches creates this situation where characters are not able to make mistakes. These fights aren't just training arcs in disguise, but are the simple black and white situation of life and death. But that then is what allows for Yuji to thrive, as with his natural ability as well as his ties to Sukuna, it all allows for him to go into these situations that would otherwise be deadly and actually hold his own. Where most people in his world would struggle, Yuji is able to go into these deadly situations, and because he's finding himself in these situations more and more, this then results in him seeing a massive growth in his overall ability, all due to the immense danger he's constantly in.
俺がホームランを打ったら次回お前がピッチャー。
shonen is not going to be a good shonen unless you have a crew of characters capable of carrying an entire arc on their own, while the main character dips out once, twice, or maybe 3 times. But with new shonen, there's also the high risk of being stuck with the super annoying, eardrum abusing crybaby cook. Thankfully, instead, this series decides to double down and spend every single skill point it has delivering one of the most well-rounded, non-traditional, traditional shonen casts in a while. JJK not playing on the tropes we usually see in shonen is refreshing. There's no fan service running through it because that's not the type of world that it is. For a change, we actually get an array of female characters in the series that create their own interest and all having their own moment to shine in the series without ever taking away from the other. And the most interesting of them, I only really came to appreciate once animated, with that character being Maki Zenin. Maki, coming from one of the most traditional Jujutsu families in this series, causes massive conflict for her as a character, as due to her family being... oh, what's the word? Found it! You are a... with the clan holding the belief that women are only made to serve. This then propels Maki to pull out the akimbo, go fuck yourself 720s, go against the ways of her clan and decide to make it on her own as a Jujutsu sorcerer. Her clan, on the other hand, ask for her to realize her delusion, asking for her to return, otherwise they'll make her and her uninvolved sister's lives a living hell. Such to an extent that when we later catch up with her, we come to learn that anytime Maki has been granted a promotion as a sorcerer and a chance to move up a grade and make her way up in the world, her family has intervened, so to keep her at the very bottom, due to her going against the grains of her clan. Learning of her situation, how she acts in it, how much of a force of nature she is, and the limitless amount of potential for growth she has, makes for one of the most interesting characters in this series, let alone her own school. Oh, I forgot to mention that she inherently has next to no cursed energy and can't naturally see her own enemies. So everything she does comes from her raw power and hands-on weapon experience. Gojo off the bat jumps in and stakes his claim as the early fan favorite, acting as the teacher, dishing us out on a psychedelic level, conveying a disdain for authority and just being a skits character. Makes for on the surface an interesting character to draw in fans that are new to the series. Yay! Gojo, while on the outside, looking like someone pressed update in Kakashi, has major complexities existing within him that actually make him a handful for the authorities in this world, while also acting as a necessity for them. As without him, the world would likely collapse and be overrun by cursed spirits. Of course, with him being so powerful would also mean that he's confident, but confidence would also mean that he has no issue with going at things alone. And just like with these other broken EOP characters, we see Gojo walk out of these crazy situations completely unscathed. But this level of confidence in his abilities would mean he may even walk into scenarios that he may not be able to win, scenarios that may be to his own detriment. But this also kind of shows how Gojo is fully aware of how brokenly OP he is. And as we usually see in other series where insanely broken characters go around breaking things that usually can't be broken, once someone has this power level, it's usually a case that they recognize the extent of their power and not let the thought of their own power corrupt them, which we see hugely in Mob Psycho with how Mob doesn't believe that his power should make him any better than anyone else. This massive amount of power that he exudes is then what makes him prime target for the collective amount of special grades that act as one of the antagonistic forces in the series, who establish that their main objective is to seal away Mr. Gojo and allow the chaos to ensue afterwards.
Oh no. Anyway,
the threat of having Gojo taken out of this world is very real, as the series already establishes that it's not going to pull punches. Then if this one were to land, it would only cause for everything we know about the series to be flipped upside down. Gojo isn't here to act as a mascot. His role in this series is arguably the most important. What he represents is the fine line between chaos and order, and without that line, one would destroy the other. Even uttering the word manga is enough to send anime-only viewers into a state of paraplegic shock. But hear me out. While hard at work and craving some flashy, punchy shonen, I found myself semi-isekai'd into this manga. Picking up where Victim A got juiced, every chapter, every arc continued to go up and up and up. And then I reached the Shibuya incident arc. This arc, being the first major one in the series, spanning over 50 chapters, completely changed how I looked at the series, and also changed the entire course of the series in the process. The arc essentially bringing together everything that was good about the series, strap it all together and ride non-stop to the fucking moon. Scenes where Yuji sees what happened to Shibuya really made me acknowledge that while this series is drawing inspiration from a lot of others, that it's doing it in its own style, to the extent that it's uniquely identifiable as Jujutsu Kaisen, and not just as the new shonen we're fighting demons and curses series. Again, there are moments in this arc that are unforgettable, as well as the sort of moments that leave you in complete and utter shock at what has just unfolded, constantly pushing characters beyond their absolute limit, and then repeating that same process all over again. and again. But it also manages to conclude this section without feeling like something's missing. And the thing is that this is only the first major arc in this series. This is for all intensive purposes our measure for what we can expect to come. And with how the chapters that immediately follow this arc go, this series is only going to keep on growing and continue to go from strength to strength. But why am I talking about an arc in the manga that probably won't be animated for years? Well, this arc alone and everything that it encompasses is enough for me to actually say that you should get into the manga. If you had any thought of getting into it, or you're just a big fan of the anime, then you should at least try it. There's a reason why the series before receiving an anime had sold over 1.5 million in 2019. What reading the manga actually made me realize is that while the anime is amazing, the reason for it being just that good isn't down to Mappa alone, but down to how strong of a foundation the Akatami laid and how brilliantly paced it is. There's a reason why I can't pick up a single copy. Because everything that this series encompasses is what the modern shonen fan wants in their series. They want danger to be a real thing for the characters. They want a strong cast. They want villains that are actually threats. Storylines that aren't just full of training arcs. To actually be excited for each and every episode and chapter that drops. We want our shonen to deliver the best possible shonen experience, but still manage to stand out from everything else that surrounds it. And that is the reason that Jujutsu Kaisen is doing so well. But the thing is, this is only the start of the series, with it looking like it could go on and surpass 300 chapters by the time it does end. And yeah, I think I've said enough on JJK. It's the same, but different.